You're listening to Areva Martin in real time. I'm your host, Areva Martin, and we are tracking today's news. Biden gives the best speech ever, some say, and he took on his hecklers. The question is, will this propel his 2024 bid for a second term? And Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders gives the response for the Republicans. Does she really believe Democrats are crazy? And is she the new face of the Republican Party? And can she be the new face if she clings to the very standard Trump culture war trigger words such as woke, woke goes to die is one of the things that we heard last night, and her reference to critical race theory. We'll keep our eye on what happens with Governor Sanders. And LeBron James, King James, makes history and passes Kareem's scoring record. A lot of folks are asking what makes LeBron so great, because it's not just on the court. He just seems to be a overall incredible human being. He gives back so much to his community, and he has been an incredible activist on so many issues related to social justice. So congratulations to King James. We are also tracking the devastating earthquake in Turkey. Over 11,000 people have lost their lives, including what we now know are 3 U.S. citizens. We are asking, how vulnerable are states in the U.S. to an earthquake of that magnitude, particularly California? And we saw Mitt Romney and George Santos exchange some terse words at the State of the Union. And we later learned that Mitt Romney told George Santos he didn't deserve to be sitting in the on the aisle so that he could shake hands with other lawmakers and the president. Romney told him he deserved to be in the back. And in fact, he didn't even deserve to be in Congress. Santos, like a petulant child, took to Twitter and tweeted, "Well, you'll never be president." So we don't know where that debate will end between Romney and Santos, but clearly some Republicans, particularly Mitt Romney, are not happy with George Santos. And the New York Times is out with a new analysis of the horrific beating of Tyre Nichols. They have actually isolated each and every blow that Mr. Nichols suffered by those ex-police officers. They've also given us shed some light on the police report that was written after Mr. Nichols was brutally beaten. In fact, one of the ex-officers framing himself as the victim of them, telling what we now know to be an absolute lie, that Mr. Nichols tried to grab for their guns, that he in fact tried to assault them. But the body camera and that poll camera tells us a very different story. Also, in news in Florida, Disney scheduled to lay off 7,000 workers. As it says, it's getting mean and lean to compete with the streaming sites that have become so prolific. We'll watch what happens as so many big tech companies are laying off workers. And folks are asking, how is it when these CEOs are making record profits, record high salaries, but yet workers, low wage workers, and even middle management workers are being laid off? And that Chinese spy balloon, part of a bigger surveillance plan by China, CNN reports. And Putin may be responsible for the 2014 downing of that Malaysian airplane. We'll be continuing to track the news in this hour. We're also taking your calls in this hour. So give us a call, 1-800-920-1580, or post a comment on our YouTube page. We want to hear from you. This is the hour where we talk to callers and get your input, get your analysis. So if you have a question, you have a comment, give us a call, 1-800-920-1580. I am talking with 2 incredibly dynamic glass ceiling breaking, I guess is the way we talk about it, women in the media. These are 2 TV weather women, and there are Black women in weather. It's not just Al Roker. When we come back, Veronica Johnson and Betty Davis. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580. This is Areva Martin in real time. I'm your host, Areva Martin. And in this hour, we are taking your call. Give us a call at 1-800-920-1580. I am super excited to be joined today by two dynamic women. Now, for decades, broadcast meteorology has been dominated by men, mostly white men, leaving out women, and particularly women of color. Of the hundreds of chief meteorologists at news stations across the country, very, very few are Black women. But now, Black women are fighting to climb the ladder and claim top I'm gonna get that word wrong, top weather jobs. I'll come back to it, but I want to welcome today Veronica Johnson and Betty Davis. Good morning, good afternoon, Veronica and Betty. I'm so happy to have both of you. You are both incredible. Betty, you are in Miami. Veronica, you're in the Washington, D.C., Virginia area. I want to start with you, Betty. What is it like to be one of the few chief meteorologists in the whole news game?
It's amazing. It's an honor. It's great. It's been great to have this position. Hasn't necessarily been a smooth or easy road, but I do love it, and I think it's about time.
About damn time, Lizzo would say. Veronica, take us from the beginning. Did you grow up as a little kid saying one day I want to be on the news doing the weather, or like what's the journey for a typical person who ends up doing the weather at a local news station?
It's funny that you should ask that question, because I'm someone who grew up watching Spencer Christian, and Spencer Christian, he used to be on Good Morning America, Black gentleman who did weather for network TV for many, many years and did it so well. I mean, he was very, charismatic, knew his stuff, knew how to interact with people, knew how to tell the weather story. So I would watch him all the time as a kid before I went out to catch the bus. And I was like, wow, I really was taken in by the fact that he was a man of color doing the weather. And that's kind of what led me into my interest in weather. But I never wanted to be that person on air doing the weather, because I was the shy kid in school. I'm the kid that took the F instead of doing any presentation in front of a group of people. So
okay, how did you overcome your stage fright?
I'm going to credit that to teachers, and then just the person within me just being hard-headed enough to always want to overcome my challenges, but also having teachers who would occasionally push me out there and go, oh, we want you to MC this, or we want you to speak about that. So, if somebody is counting on you to do something, then you feel like you have to rise to the occasion. And having more teachers that would do that to me and for me, I really have been so blessed. But yeah, Spencer Christian was the guy who did it for me. He was the meteorologist that I so looked up to. But like Betty said, it's been amazing, the stations that I've had the opportunity to work at, the stops along the way, the people that I've met that do weather, and then outside of weather and Betty can speak about this too with, our weather enterprise. So we as broadcasters, we work on TV telling the weather, but then within our own within our own weather world, whether it's AMS, the American Meteorological Society, or NWA, National Weather Association, or some of these conferences and conventions that we go to, we get a chance to interact and mingle with other meteorologists as well. And I can tell you, whether it's in front of the camera, behind the camera, or even in research, there are still very few of us.
Yeah, I was looking at a statistic from the American Meteorological Society, that AMS group that you mentioned. It said only 2% of the meteorologists in the country are African American. So tell us, Betty, what are the obstacles? Like, why so few? I mean, we know Black folks aren't represented in all aspects of media in a proportion to our, makeup in terms of our demographics in the country, but why in the weather? Why is that number so low in weather in particular?
I believe representation does have a lot to do with it. I think I see more of us, more Black people in the field now than when I came along. I think representation has a lot to do with it. And I also think just the younger people knowing that this is a career, this is a major, this is a career path. And I just think it's one of those careers that a lot of young people may not necessarily think about. And when I talk to them, I often tell them, you don't have to be on TV to be a meteorologist. So I think that's another thing people don't realize. I just think it's one of those careers that a lot of us haven't been exposed to. A lot of us maybe didn't even know existed. I mean, I found out really that this was something that I was interested in when I did an internship at a TV station. I was 19 years old, majoring in English at Spelman College, thinking I'll just become a news reporter. And I got to hang around the weather department, and the meteorologist there was a white guy, but I liked what the white guy was doing. So, and it just kind of took off from there.
Is that the typical career path for most folks who do weather in news? Is that they go to school, they get a journalism degree, they come out, they work in, a TV station doing journalism? Is that the typical career path?
It varies. I did get my degree in English, but I went back to school and got a degree in geosciences with an emphasis in broadcast meteorology. I mean, there are some people, and I went on to get, every certification you can think of, but for some people, they've been able to do it with a journalism degree, but with the way the business has changed and the science has been elevated now, I really think you cannot, I won't say you can't. I will say that you will have more success if you earn a meteorology degree or atmospheric science or geoscience or something along that, because there's just, you cannot do this career and not know weather, and you need to know more than the basics.
And science. And that's right. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think people are under the impression that you are just reading copy, that I don't know, it comes over a feed, a news feed, and you're just reading copy. But help us understand, Betty, how that is so not what happens in your day, and that you're using scientific principles, and you need to have, as Veronica said, you need a background. You need a foundation in science.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Every day that I walk in this door, I am looking at forecast models. I can tell you, we'll take today, for example, and I don't know if this is something I should be bragging about, but I don't even know what the National Weather Service said about the weather. Because
I'm the same way, Betty. I'm the same way. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, I love the National Weather Service, but I'm like, you of course, when you first start out, right? Your first year or 3 years, you're looking at Weather Service stuff. After that, you got.
But let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Veronica. So the National Weather Service that you're making reference to, you said when you first start out, are they giving you like what the weather is of that day in your region, and are you just reading what they tell you, or even in those early days, are you?
Well, I think it's a security blanket for a lot of people when they're first starting out, right? It's so when you first start out, you graduate from college, start working at a TV station, you get help from some of the senior people there, or whoever is the chief, and then if you're working a weekend by yourself, maybe you check and see what the National Weather Service is doing. You don't take the whole entire weather service forecast, right? The National Weather Service, they're, in different cities across the country, they issue forecasts very specific to the area. And they also issue, advisories and warnings and that sort of thing for the area. But once you're someone who's worked for a while in this business, and especially in a specific market, then the area and the science of the area, then you're the weather expert. You're the one who's talking about issuing your own alerts, whether it's a fog alert or an ice alert, because it's all about the details then. And the more details that you can provide, the more guidance that you can provide to your customers, your viewers, then the better off you are. And that's why people are going to have confidence in you and want to turn to you and listen to you.
But Betty, what about all those Black kids who say, oh, I'm no good in science. Oh, I hate science. I'm not good in math. If I have to go, take a science class, this is not going to be the career for me.
Hopefully they're getting a good foundation in science and math. I had a great foundation in science and math. I had sisters who were majoring in engineering. So when I went off to college, I was either going to be like them, I was going to major in biomedical engineering or become a journalist. So it was like flipping the switch was not difficult for me. I knew I could do it. So if you get a great foundation in science and math, and when you go to college, and if you're majoring, if you're thinking you want to become, I don't know, a business owner, and then you want to become a meteorologist, if you have a great foundation in science and math from very young, I just think you can do it. You really can. I just believe that.
Right. So Veronica, I was reading that you're now a chief, right? And tell us what that means to be the chief meteorologist.
It means you're doing what you were doing before, whether on TV for your.
You guys are laughing like, is there some inside joke about chiefs?
And now you're tacking on another 4 hours of administrative work and just making sure that everything is buttoned up within the department, whether it's, getting on top of storms days out and coordinating with the web team and coordinating with events that you're going to do, a little more of, it's more oversight, and it's positioning yourself with promotions, with web, with marketing, so that, you can, if you're the number one station, the number one weather team, so that you can continue to align yourself that way. Hey, I wanted to go back to one thing that Betty was saying about math and in science and physics. Okay. So when I was in college, for me, it wasn't as easy. I was a single mom in college, struggling to get through it, working 3 jobs, getting a couple of C's here and there. And there was one subject that I needed to graduate, and I'm trying, I think it was thermodynamics of air. So, right, like
that sounds
equations,
hard.
That's equations
a hard one. Equations that don't even have numbers anymore.
Yeah, that sounds tough.
The point that I was going to make is that for me, I didn't have a plan B. This was my only plan, and it had to work. So the point I'm trying to make here is that I knew that I needed to take that course. I needed to graduate. I needed to do better in the math and in some of the physics courses that I was taking. So I took it upon myself to get a tutor, right? Because if this is what you want, get a tutor if you can't figure it out on your own. There's nothing wrong with getting a tutor, and there's nothing wrong with investing in yourself, because ain't nobody else going to do it.
Very true. And there's nothing wrong.
Advice, absolutely great advice. Go ahead, Betty. You want to jump in?
I was going to say, and if you don't do well the first time, like, don't give up. I remember my first thermo exam, I did not pass it. Right. And then I realized, like, you know what? You have to learn these equations.
Right.
So, I mean, you really just have to have that type of focus. And once I learned the equations, it was easy. So, I mean, you just have to have a certain amount of focus and commitment. And if you don't do well on something the first time, just don't, you got to stick with it.
Yeah. Now, Betty, when you went to college, how many of your professors were minority? How diverse was how diverse was your professors and your class?
Except at Spelman, the Mississippi State, 0.
Yeah, and for me it was 0.
And is that pretty common in this field, that you're not going to have any people of color who are professors?
Yeah, well, it was fairly common for me back in the day, and I would say it probably hasn't changed too much now. And for me, what was hard is, when you start struggling, if everybody else acts like it's so easy, it's
Right.
hard to open yourself up to say that you have an issue to, folk who don't look like you and who you might
Yeah.
not feel as comfortable with, because all eyes are kind of on you like, oh yeah, we didn't think you'd figure it out.
Yeah, and I guess because you're talking about the lack of diversity in terms of the professors and teachers, what about your classmates? Did you have other people of color in your class who were studying the same field, who you could talk to, find support with, be there for each other, or was it pretty isolating?
It was isolating
Yeah.
for me, extremely.
Yeah.
So, and what did you do? I mean, that's one of the things, again, I've talked to so many students now. I mean, and I don't know when you were in college, and I imagine it was, some years ago, but that is a common experience. You still hear people of color, particularly African-American students, talk about is how isolating it can be, particularly when you're on a predominantly white campus. I actually just hired someone who took a year off of graduate school because of those feelings of being so isolated, not having any support system. What did you do? I'll ask you first, Betty. How did you cope with that? How did you get through it? I mean, you had been a Spelman, so you've been around a lot of Black folks.
And I think that was what helped me get through it. Like, I knew, because of Spelman, I knew what I was capable of. So that experience alone, I think, has just helped propel me in so many ways through continuing my education and surviving the TV business.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things too, Veronica. You're not only dealing with the subset of weather in journalism, you're dealing with the reality that there's not a whole lot of Black folks in newsrooms, period, across the country, in front of the camera, behind the camera. We just, African-American male just came to the Los Angeles market at our local CBS affiliate, and I've got a close relationship with him. His name is Joe Villame. And we talk about the few numbers there are of general managers and presidents of news stations who are people of color.
Right.
How did that impact you coming into this field, like going into a newsroom where there were probably very few Black people in the newsroom, period?
Right. Yeah. I would say that I got my foot in the door because of my experience. We across the board need to do a better job of making sure that we have folks sitting at the table on the other side, those people who are news directors, assistant news directors. We've got to make sure that we've got people sitting at the table who are professors at these universities that may not be as diverse right now, right? So that in department, you are seeing a mixture of people, so that when students take classes, they do feel comfortable and see their reflection, right? We say that all the time in news. We need to be a reflection of our community, and so do these different sectors in which we interact in, and if we're going to do a better job of diversifying the sciences. Right.
Yeah.
And it's not just weather. It's a lot of different fields, but especially weather.
Yeah, when we come forward, we're going to talk about the fact that we didn't have the first Black female, meteorologist until 1970s, which is unbelievable to me. We're also going to talk about what it takes to break some of these glass ceilings. And I know in your case, Veronica, you were passed over a couple of times before you got that chief's position. So we're going to talk about that. Stay with us. KBLA Talk 1580, sports, news, and traffic next. We are tracking breaking news and some news in the sports world. Russell Westbrook is being traded. He will no longer be a Laker. He's only been with the team for 2 seasons, but in a 3-team trade between the Lakers, the Jazz, and Timberwolves, it looks like Russell Westbrook is headed to the Timberwolves in Minnesota. Waiting for reactions from Laker fans. We know at KBLA, one of our producers thinks this is not a good idea for the Lakers. He's a little upset about this trade, but we're going to see as fans, I'm sure, will start to weigh in on the trade of Russell Westbrook. He's leaving the Lakers after 2 terms, headed to the Timberwolves. We've been tracking breaking news all day, obviously talking about in the first hour, the Joe Biden in his second State of the Union getting rave reviews. So many experts and pundits suggesting that he increased his likability substantially and perhaps will tamp down on the chatter, even within the Democratic Party, that there needs to be a new candidate for 2024. We've also been tracking that devastating earthquake in Turkey. Our prayers are with those families. So far, 11,000 plus people have lost their lives as a result of the deadly earthquake. And in the horrific beating of Tyree Nichols, new evidence continues to be revealed to the public, even evidence now that a photograph was taken by one of the ex-officers of the bloody and beaten body of Tyree Nichols. That photograph was sent out to 5 or 6 individuals, none of them individuals that should have had access to that photo, including a female acquaintance of the ex-officer, not describing in detail what the connection is between that ex-officer and the female. There's some chatter online that perhaps the ex-officer, his last name is Martin, may have had some kind of romantic relationship with this female. Maybe even Tyree Nichols did at some point. But as we continue to get information on the beating of Tyree Nichols and potentially more criminal charges for officers who arrived at the scene and those officers that may have been involved in falsifying police reports, we'll continue to track that story and bring you the latest. But I'm talking in this last segment of the show with Betty Davis and Veronica Johnson. They are 2 Black women who are breaking barriers in weather. Betty is in Miami and Veronica's in the Washington, D.C. area. And I want to ask both of you, how much does what happens in news, the breaking news, Joe Biden's State of the Union, LeBron James breaking Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's record, how much does breaking news impact what you all do on a daily basis?
Betty, did you want to go?
You can start.
Okay, so one of the things that we've started doing here is producing more of the weather hits that we do. You know, back in the day, it used to be a 30-minute newscast would have, you know, maybe 2 weather hits in it that would be really long, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, sometimes 3 minutes, 30 seconds. But now here, at least in the DC market and at more TV stations, we're producing weather more, meaning say you've got a small plane that just went into some wires, maybe it's a windy day and firefighters are fighting a fire. So taking which we know weather has an impact on everything, and then tossing to weather to talk about, well, did that plane accident happen because of the weather? How are the firefighters going to be tackling this fire? What are the temperatures? Are the lines going to freeze? So really taking those news stories and trying to weave them into weather more, because it is the story of the day and the story of the things that are happening out there that are part of news. Now, it may not be, like with the president's speech last night, but certainly there are a lot of stories that can be woven in more tightly with weather and produced with weather.
Is that happening also, Betty, at your station in Miami?
Not as much during hurricane season and the rainy season. I mean, I have weather hits left and right, but I'll give you an example. For a day like today, the weather's nice and quiet. No brush fire, nothing big happens. The producer will say, we have too many stories. You get a minute 30 for weather. So we always do weather now. We don't float weather, right? But they really cut my time a lot. Miami has a lot of interesting, crazy news. So
Well, yeah, but a
they
lot of
try to
weather, right? A lot of
pack that-
storms in Miami as well.
during rainy season. We're in the
During-
dry season right now. So this is our really quiet, chill time. So I get a little break. But as soon as the rainy season cranks up, I have my running shoes on.
Okay, all
It
hands on
doesn't
deck.
stop. Yeah.
Veronica, I read about you being passed over a couple of times for white men in your station or at your station. Tell us about that and how.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you that is, of course, my opinion, my interpretation, right?
Mhm.
If you were to look at my resume and where it was during those times when I was passed over against a resume of someone who may have gotten that position and experience on the air, it would certainly leave one scratching their head. But
Well, I'm an employment civil rights lawyer, so I
Mhm.
understand what you're saying. And I've seen lots of resumes of African-American women and other women of color. And when they are compared side by side with their white counterparts, oftentimes white males, it's astonishing to see how much more accomplished Black women are in particular jobs, but yet they don't have the same access to upward mobility. So it's not uncommon.
that's
Not just
right.
in weather, as you know.
And in this world of weather, there are so few positions, especially if you don't want to leave and go out of the market. So what do? Well, if you're someone like us, you work even harder, because now you were working hard before and busting your butt. Now you're working even harder because you got to show them, right? You got to show them sometimes that you're just as good. Okay, I guess I wasn't being as loud or profound enough with my expertise in what I was doing. So let me just do it a little harder. And I'm going to tell you that when you're passed over twice, sometimes you're like, okay, you convince yourself that maybe you didn't want it to begin with, when you really did, but it can be a coping mechanism. So I'm really ecstatic to be sitting where I am today, because it's not just for me finally getting the position as chief. It's so that I can show other young women, other minorities, that they too can get here. And as long as I'm here, I'm going to help nurture and pull up those who do want to be in a position like this, or to help them, achieve their dreams, if it's in the sciences.
That makes a lot of sense. We do have a caller that wants to comment. Sean from Oakland, are you on the line? See if our producer can get Sean on the line. While he's, yes. Hi, Sean, how are you? We hear you.
I
Sean,
want to comment on the
I think there's some issue with your sound. I'm gonna let my producer try to work that out, and we'll get you back on the line. In the meantime, while he's working that out, Betty, talk to us about the obstacles that you faced. What are some of the obstacles that you faced in terms of you're a chief as well?
Yes.
Did you face similar obstacles where you felt like you were passed over?
I wouldn't say
your race?
I wouldn't say passed over. There was a lot of drama surrounding me getting this position, because there was a white male in the role that everybody loved, and management decided they were going to make a change. And they approached me about the position, and I was surprised that they approached me about the position, because I'll be honest, I just had this mindset that they wouldn't be looking for me, right?
Right.
But they were looking for me, and they put me in the role. Now, when they put me in this role, they did not give me the chief title, so that rubbed me the wrong way. So, but they did not give it to me. About, I guess, 8 months passed, and then they finally officially gave me the title. But that was a little bump for me, and that's one of those things, like Veronica, that still has me scratching my head.
Yeah. Did you ever
hold that thought?
ask
Hold
them?
that thought.
Okay.
I got to go to commercial, but when we come forward, I want to talk about imposter syndrome because I think that is something that so many African-American women in particular deal with. When we come forward, KBLA Talk 1580. We are back and you're listening to Areva Martin in real time. I'm your host, Areva Martin, and I am talking to two dynamic women who are breaking barriers in TV weather. Betty Davis is in Miami and Veronica Johnson is in the Washington, D.C., Virginia area. And during the break, both of you said something that was very interesting to me. Betty, you talked about most African Americans in weather typically being on the weekends. And that I assume that in weather, the weekend shows are not as glamorous, not seen, as as high profile as the weekday shows. Talk to us about that.
During my time in TV, it's just something I always noticed. The people of color mostly would be on the weekend shifts, and the people not of color, especially when it came to weather people, would have a Monday through Friday shift. There were a few select markets where I did notice people of color working, the main gigs. I saw Veronica in DC. And that's why I said, Veronica, I never realized you weren't the chief. I saw Janice Huff in New York City. I would see Vivian Brown on the Weather Channel, and I would see Al Roker. And I mean, just
I think that's all of
few.
our impression of Blacks in weather is Al Roker. And I'm just so glad to see that women, kudos to Al. He's been amazing, and he's had an incredible career, and he continues to have one.
And I will say this about Al, and if Janice hears this, she can comment, but I'm pretty sure that Al Roker was very instrumental in getting Janice, the role that she's in, where it is more visual and more front and center.
Well, Al definitely, I think, definitely in the eyes of what I'll call laypersons, people who are not in the weather business, seemingly transformed the weather report into something much bigger, something much more involved. What impact really has he had on the entire profession? It seems like, he's laid out this pathway where you're doing weather, but you're doing so much more.
There's a lot of stations across the country where the weather person will do stories, environmental stories, or feature stories to showcase what's happening in the community. There are some TV stations that actually have a community show where sometimes the weather person will be a host or co-host of that show. So yes, we do have to wear a lot of different hats. And on top of that, not just being, the broadcast meteorologist, but a lot of times the weather person is also the station scientist, like the earthquake that just happened. In a newsroom, who's the one person who's probably taken the most science courses is the meteorologist. So producers, they recognize that, they're aware of that. The American Meteorological Society, AMS, they recognize that, and they try and give weather folks as much tools as possible to be able to talk about these things with confidence, whether it's something that involves space science, geology, things that have to do with climate change, because that can be, that can get political quite quickly.
Right.
So, just give me the facts, just give me the good science, so that, we as meteorologists feel confident in delivering the information.
You said something else, Veronica, that caught my attention during the break, and you talked about, doing your job or approaching your job with the attitude that you cannot fail, that you have to, be at the top of your game at all times. And I think about that and the generation that grew up with that thought that we had to be twice as good, we had to work twice as hard. But I look at today's millennials and Gen Z, that population of folks who say, I'm not trying to work that hard. Quality of my life is equally important, my friendships, my leisure time. So what do you say again to some young person who's listening to this, watching this, who's thinking about a career in journalism, maybe a career in weather, who doesn't want to be that person that's working 12 to 14 hours a day?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. So I have a 37-year-old, but then I have a 27-year-old and a 25-year-old, right? And the ones that are in their 20s, those are the ones that I'm trying to understand. I can't take, what worked for me and have them apply that with the same vigor that helped me get through life, right? Because they do want more of a work-life balance. So I'm trying to kind of meet them in the middle and understand where they're coming from, but at the same time tell them that, you know, yes, you do need to work hard. Do you need to work the, you know, 60, 70-hour week? Like I did, you know, many times? Probably not if your counterparts are doing it. But if you're someone who someday wants to have your own business, and you know, be someone who takes, you know, pride in that business being a success, then absolutely, you know. So, you know, like Betty, I'm sure this is true of you. From the moment I wake up until I close my eyes, it's all about weather, right? I wake up, pick up my phone, I answer emails.
That sounds like a really all-encompassing
You know
job,
what?
Veronica. Is that how you're doing weather, Betty, from sun up to sundown?
Not as much anymore, because I've been in the role for 8 years now. And it just depends on the season we're in. We're in dry season now. So I'm learning that when dry season is here, I can breathe a little bit. That doesn't mean I don't have 200 emails in my inbox, but I have tried to restructure things, because when I first started, I mean, 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. But
Okay.
now, about 8 years later, I'm just kind of restructuring everything, right? I'm like, the community knows me, I know them.
Your
It's gonna
station
be
knows you're
okay.
hardworking. They know you're dedicated.
They
They
do.
know you're committed. So you don't have as much to prove.
I don't have as much to prove. That's the thing. I don't have as much to prove. So, and Veronica, I don't think you have a darn thing to prove. I mean, you have been there.
So I've been in this market now, let's see, so I've been in the DMV for.
I got about 2 minutes, Veronica. So I gotta
Sure.
have you
I was gonna
give
say
it
for
to
about
us in
27
30
years.
seconds.
For about 27 years. So I've been doing weather and the people know me. However, in the role of chief, I think that's where still, you know, I want to make sure that I get more of the great emails from the people who are happy to see me here than the other. But at the same time, you know, I'm not listening to the noise. I'm listening to myself. And it's
that's what's
myself
important.
yeah.
We got to all listen to what our own inner
Exactly.
voice tells us. Thank you so much, Veronica. Thank you so much, Betty. Keep breaking those glass ceilings. Keep representing for that next generation of journalists and weather people. You all are such an incredible, you're both such incredible role models. And I have so much respect for what you do. And it's just been a pleasure spending some time with you during this evening. So again, kudos to you and keep representing. We need more Black women in positions of power like the two of you. I want to thank everybody who joined me for Areva Martin in Real Time. We will be back tomorrow, same time, talking about all the latest news, giving you expert analysis and unfiltered opinions. The next voice that you will hear will be Les Brown. He's here to motivate you all month long on KBLA Talk 1580. You got to be hungry. If you are looking for some inspiration, you do not want to miss Les Brown. He's coming up and he will be with us for the entire month of February. You want to continue this conversation with me? Follow me on all social media platforms at Areva Martin. We are going to continue to bring you the latest in news and analysis. And again, have a wonderful evening. I'm out. Next voice that you hear will be Les Brown after some news, traffic, and sports.